This is Wandering Universe. Today, I'll be exploring something slightly different, something new, a concept that was manifested since the end of the last ice age. I'm going to be exploring celestial mapping. Also, I'll be adding a little flavour into the mix. Celestial star mapping history, Polynesian style. So, let's go exploring. Here we are. I showed you in a previous video the mapping of Orion's belt, and as you can see here, this is it. Next one. This is an 1895 map of the positioning of the constellations. They date it as far back as 14,700 years ago. So pretty well done, may I say. And I'm going to show you something else. It's pretty interesting, this one. This is a Chinese celestial mapping done on a coin. And as you can see, if you look at the symbols right here, so for example, the rising sun and the setting sun, notice how it's got a little dot in the middle. You see this in the Egyptian hieroglyphs. There's a clue. And as you can see in their Chinese symbols, you can see what's been labeled here and how they depict the Orion's belt, according to how they witnessed it and studied it in the night sky. So very, very interesting how they mapped out the Big Dipper right here. They haven't joined the two dots right here with a line across it, but nevertheless, that's how they witnessed it. Celestial star mapping has been around since the dawn of sea voyaging thousands upon thousands of years ago. From the first evolution of the Europeans, Greeks, Chinese, Japanese, Native Americans, Siberians, the first evolved Norse, right down to the Aboriginals and the Sindhis people from northern India, who were all brave enough to journey out to sea. This is the map of the last ice age, and as you can see, this is the starting point of the beginning of the melting of the ice right here. And as you can see, there are landmass bridges right here that connect to other continents that the indigenous people used to walk across quite easily. It probably evolved during the last ice age. We're talking about celestial mapping at the beginning of the melting of the ice. The Polynesians, who were Siberian descendant during the last ice age, established a means to travel from island to island by crossing land bridges as indicated in this map. During that time, they were able to pinpoint where the nearest island were by following the positioning of the stars and the shape of the mountain. So it seemed rather simple to get from one island to another without too much difficulty then. But around, say, between 20,000 to 15,000 years ago, the moment the ice began to melt, trekking on landmass bridges were diminishing, and the journey to get from one island to the next was proving more and more difficult. So they had very little choice but to become meticulous at star mapping, studying every star in the night sky, charting their course by calculating the movement of the Orion constellation, knowing when it was a good day to set sail to explore a new island. This was the earliest foundation of celestial mapping. I'm going to give you a little bit of a history into the background of celestial mapping, just so you get a little niche idea, a grasp of how it all began. The earliest known human-made image of the Orion belt was found in a cave in Germany. It is a mammoth ivory carving, and it dates back to about 38,000 years old. I'll show you a photo right here. This is the only one I found on the internet. This is the best one I could find of a carved mammoth with the symbols carved into the body of the object. I'm not sure if this depicts Orion's belt. If it doesn't, someone just please send me a photo and just put it in the comment section. But this is the one, this is the best one I found online. I'll show you something else that's really intriguing. This is a map that was drawn by the people of the Pawnee tribe in North America. And as you can see, the way they etched the crosses, the way they observed the stars in the night sky, and how they calculated the movement of the stars, and then they etched in crosses, as you can see here, on the surface of this particular parchment. And even though they knew it in their own language, we'd see it as that's the Big Dipper right here, the Little Dipper, Northern Star, that would be the snake, and that's the string of pearls. And as you can see, that's the Corona Borealis, the Pleiades, and the Hyades, as you can see right here. So it's pretty well done, may I say, how they mapped out the constellation on their parchment. Pretty well done, may I say. Our need to risk venturing out into the unknown happened around after the melting of the ice. It is possible that us humans, after dinner was served, we'd spend some time stargazing, analysing the positioning of the stars in awe and wonder. We had a nice curiosity, and we did, for the stars as we stare out into space, seeing them floating around like bright little glowing butterflies in the night sky. And of course, we'd paint that image from what we witnessed onto a wall or paper to learn a new means of finding our way from one place to another, star charting. And I'll show you what I mean right here. So if you're out there tonight and you want to gaze and study the Orion belt, please do so. The previous image I showed you is one of the oldest known image of a star map pattern, other than the Pawnee parchment I showed you there. And I'm talking about the mammoth ivory carving. This probably explains why the Polynesians are proficient sea navigators, as they have a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA, and this is scientifically true. They may have settled amongst the Neanderthals for a while, but decided to branch out into other parts of Siberia, and then out of the blue, thanks to a marvelous concept called curiosity, made them get up and go for a wander. Then, once they grew enough confidence and courage, they began to migrate from the wilderness of Siberia to discovering the Pacific Ocean using an indigenous celestial star mapping. And I'll show you right here. This I find, really fascinating. This is one of the oldest known ivory tablets of the stars. It's 32,000 years old, and as you can see, what it's inscribed is the belt of Orion, believe it or not. So it's just really incredible how they knew to pinpoint the stars and draw them on the front of this ivory tablet. It's just absolutely amazing how they did it. Now, you must be wondering, how did the Polynesians do it? How did they learn to read a star map? Was it all guesswork, trial and error? Was it a risky endeavor? But well, it was a risky endeavor, as a matter of fact, but nevertheless, they were the first ones to actually do it. Is there a connection with geometry, mathematics, and sound? Of course. It's all interconnected, and they use that arithmetic to chart their voyage accurately. That's how they did it. The Polynesians were one of the world's, and I do say one of the world's first astronomers who learnt a great deal about the stars, their positions, and the movement of the stars. Their astronomy knowledge helped them to coordinate a celestial star map in preparation for a celestial sea voyage. The first star position was, believe it or not, the belt of Orion, and I'll show you how they did it. I borrowed this courtesy of Hawaiian star mapping, it's called. I'll leave it in the description box below, and as you can see, I used the belt of Orion as a starting point, and also the Big Dipper to help them correlate their star charting before they go out onto their first voyage. It's all in Polynesian. If you want to translate it into English, Greek or Latin versions, you can, but as you can see, this is how they calculated the positions of the stars starting from the northern horizon if you're on Hawaii, and if you're in New Zealand, you start from the southern horizon there. From midwinter, this is their signal of dawn rising, of, I'll pronounce this well, please don't beat me up over this, Mata Riki, the Pleiades, Regal, and Sirius. Hopefully I've pronounced it right. The belt of Orion is the season indicator of winter, and that's in the northern hemisphere. And it's also indicated in the southern hemisphere. Orion's belt is the most important starting point as the navigation tool for their maiden voyage along the Pacific Ocean. They studied the stars carefully, they chart their course, memorize every single star position, timing of their speed, and measure the altitude of the horizon by using their hands. Believe it or not, these things. Who would have thought, that these would come handy one day? Okay. I'll show you something here. This is what I've been talking about. So I've shown this illustration in a previous video, how they mapped out the belt of Orion right there. So you can look at this and study it in your own time. Once they've accurately studied the night sky, they were ready to set sail to venture alone at sea into the unknown. They courageously did this by sailing on a Nagati Kahunugu canoe, and this is how they got to the Pacific Islands, including Aotearoa, which is today's New Zealand, and I'll show you what I mean. This is another map that they've drawn out. So you start from the horizon, and then from the southeast if you're in New Zealand, and this is how you lay out the star map coordinates right there. This is the very canoe that they sailed on. Yes, dangerous voyage. I'm really amazed at this technology, this fantastic invention of this. It's actually, technically speaking, a catamaran, but how they managed to set sail out in the Pacific Ocean, especially to Hawaii, to map out the Pacific Ocean themselves using just their hands and the stars and their bodies is really amazing. Absolutely incredible, this feat that they engineered. So pretty well done, may I say. It is also possible that they reached the south coast of South America and subantarctic islands. It was during that time, once the islands were surrounded by water after the ice melted, they undertook a bold and brave move to explore the unknown out on their own. They couldn't hold back. I mean, they couldn't help themselves, could they? Neither you or I could help ourselves at their curiosity any longer, as someone had to do it. I mean, come on. Someone had to get the whole thing started, right? They wanted to know what was out there beyond the ones they knew, right? This is what I'm talking about. Now, I'm going to go into a little bit of detail how they do this. So I'll demonstrate how they mapped it out. To star map your voyage, you just need to use your hands, okay, and your body as a compass. So for example, your hands act like a geometry tool, such as the width of your pinky. If you can see right here, the width of your pinky at arm's length, as you can see here, I think it's either from elbow to the pinky or to the shoulder, is roughly 1 degree. So if you lift your hand, I think I've got it here. Yep. If you lift your hand and palm facing out with your thumb extended, as you can see, this measures the altitude by how high the horizon is, right? And I'm talking about the bottom of the hand here. That's the starting point. So if you face your palm to the night sky where Orion is, thumb extended at right angle, you'll find the altitude of northern latitude indicated by the red giant, and the red giant would be right where the index finger is. Okay, so that's how they measured the position of the stars. Very clever, may I say. Smart and clever, these people. So pretty well done, may I say. A good example of this from the Disney film, you may have seen this, but I'll just go into it, I'll recap a little bit, is Moana. I haven't seen it myself, you may have. So you may have seen a scene that she demonstrated briefly how it works when she was calculating the positioning of the stars by facing her palm towards Orion's belt and its constellation as a starting point. What's also interesting is that the Polynesians used geometry by mapping out the Pacific Ocean as a triangle. So as you can see, from the tip of the index finger down to the tip of the thumb, at right angle, that's the triangle. So this is how they mapped out the Pacific Ocean and the three main islands right there. So I'll show you this map. You'll see this map. I've demonstrated this map in my previous video on the Marquesas Islands and the age of Easter Island, or should I say Rapa Nui. But I'll recap. As you can see, that's the Hawaiian island, that's the New Zealand island, and that's the Easter Island. So you can see right here, that's the starting point. The triangle is basically just a starting point that acts like a compass, where Hawaii is north, Rapa Nui is southeast, and Aotearoa, Roa, I think it's called, is southwest, and Tahiti is smack bang in the middle, right? So this is how they know where they need to go. And from the starting point, from the base of the triangle right here, this is how they map out the Polynesian journey from, say, for example, from the coastal line of Chile. They go out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, then they head out to French Polynesia, where Marquesas Island is, and then they go to Samoa, Fiji, Vanuatu, all the other Polynesian islands. They go to the northern parts of Indonesia, the Philippines, and then they go to Taiwan and all the way to China. Now, you got to remember that China used to be southern Siberia, and that's where the Polynesians have descended from. They descended from some branches of Siberia, say the central part, southern part, and southwest part, or should I say southeast part of Siberia. And from there, they would have been curious, were there other places they'd like to go exploring to find better resources and better places to settle on? And they did. When the Ice Age was around, there used to be land mass bridges they just virtually walked across. It was rarely they would needed a boat to actually sail across from one island to another. You just easily get there on foot. That was during the Ice Age. But as soon as the ice began to melt, it became suddenly more and more difficult for them to map out their journey. So they had to rely on the stars, positioning of the stars, and also using their bodies as a compass. I'm going to go into that in a moment, in order to coordinate where north and south was and finding the northern and southern horizon, using their hand to indicate that. So this is what I've illustrated, what I've shown in my previous videos right there. But I'll get into this in a little bit more detail. They also use their bodies to act like a compass, calculate the coordinates by feeling the magnetic field. I know it's hard to believe, but it's true. If, say for example, if the body feels the magnetic field by turning towards it, and it feels right and good, then they know they're heading in the right direction. If they feel off and quite sick and it feels not right, they are heading in the wrong direction. So that's how they knew where north and south, east and west was, believe it or not. The wayfinder, or in today's terms, a navigator for the captain, is in charge of mapping the coordinates charted for its voyage using geometry, a compass, and a sextant. And I'll show you what I mean. As you can see, you've seen this before. This is a 1770 sextant used during Captain Cook's time and other maiden sea voyage explorers, and even the Dutch as well. And this is a 1946 star navigation lithograph, believe it or not. So this is how they charted their course during World War II. The Polynesian navigators must have a healthy, strong brain to memorize the star constellation meticulously to help determine latitude, longitude, altitude, angles of the stars, position, speed, seasons, and use the horizon as a starting point. The Polynesians also used the star map to determine what day it was, the seasons, and the year. Now, I wouldn't be surprised, and get this, I wouldn't be surprised that the writer, I think his name is Gene Roddenberry, of the Star Trek series, gained knowledge from this, believe it or not, that I've been talking about in this video, and promoted the idea throughout the series as the new star date calendar system. I bet he did. It's plausible, as it's virtually impossible to implement the Gregorian calendar, as it has no basis or any relevance or correlation to star mapping when it comes to trekking in space, and I couldn't agree more. Now, I'll show you what I mean. Imagine using the Gregorian calendar to do a star date. Virtually impossible. You have to remember the planets are many light years away. So the Gregorian calendar is virtually out the window. It can't calculate light years through just mapping out the days and weeks and months using that. It's just virtually impossible. I'll show you something that's interesting I found online too. This is the Star Trek Captain Kirk's star log, as you can see here. This is the start date, this is the entry, and the subject, and his little journal on what he observed through his voyage. So very interesting, I must say. Eventually in the future, this is what we're going to use, believe it or not. This is going to be, I think Star Trek is actually a trailblazer for star mapping, but also using it as a calendar to voyage out beyond our solar system. So I find this pretty incredible and pretty ingenious how they came up with this when they used it throughout the series. So it really is amazing. I'll give credit to Gene Roddenberry. Pretty well done, may I say. It requires, the way I see it, it requires a new form of physics to scrap the old world calendar system and come up with an appropriate star date calendar that lines up with the positioning of celestial space. You got to remember, space is infinite, it's universal, it's non-stop. So the Gregorian calendar would deem useless, as proven in the Star Trek series. And once again, I couldn't agree more in that regard. And this is what I mean. Okay, so if you want to analyze this in your own time, please go right ahead. If you've seen the Star Trek series, I recommend the original series, and I don't mind Enterprise, where it talks about the early days of star trekking and also the development of the warp drive. So I find it interesting, actually. Some episodes are very intriguing, absorbing, and a little bit teary-eyed as well. Some of them, okay, to what happens to some of them and to the encounters they've met. And some of the episodes in the series, well, can be a bit okay, scratch your head moment, or what they call it, writers, they call it refrigerator moment. But anyway, I'll move on. The Polynesians must have wondered, whilst they watched birds migrate in their season, if birds can navigate their way across Earth thanks to the magnetic field to help them chart their course, why not us, they thought. If whales can use their sonar like a compass to detect which way north and south is, and sing their songs to communicate to other whales journeying hundreds of kilometers for migration season, why not us, they thought. And guess what? They did. And I'll show you what I mean. This is a bird migration map, and as you can see, this is how they migrate, right? So they must have observed birds migrating from south to north and back again. And they thought, well, if they can use it, if they can detect it, why not us? That's where their curiosity developed. And from there, that's where they started studying celestial mapping. And that's where they started studying, incorporating geometry to detect where the birds were actually going to which particular continent they were going to migrate during their season. So as you can see, I'll just show you right here. So for example, here in South America, bottom part of Chile, this particular bird would fly day and night, non-stop, like an overseas flight. If you're from Australia and you're from Melbourne or Sydney, if you fly over the Pacific Ocean all night, non-stop for 13 hours. That's by jumbo jet, 747. But this bird, talk about an incredible brave feat, okay? To fly non-stop from the southern part of South America to the central part of America, all the way to the northern part of Canada, non-stop, day and night. They would have had to fill themselves with a really high protein diet during their season in the southern hemisphere, and to prep themselves for a very long journey to fly all the way up to northern parts of Canada, say near Greenland. And by the time they landed there, you wouldn't want to disturb them. And whatever you do, do not disturb them, because they are absolutely fatigued and exhausted, and they need to have many days of rest. So because their energy is virtually spent, and they need the time to actually find food, to fill themselves up again, to prep themselves to migrate back to the southern hemisphere. And of course, us humans, well, the 747 is virtually a flying hotel. I mean, you've got everything provided to fill yourself up before you migrate to, say, America or other continents in the globe. So you don't have to worry about that. We're very privileged. But the birds, they're not. They've got it tough. And from what I've read, the way they did it, and the Polynesians would have thought this is pretty miraculous how they did it, they glided with their eyes closed, and they glided during the night. That's incredible how they did it, these birds. And I'll show you another one. This is the migration map of humpback whales. And as you can see right here, I'll give you an example. From the southern part of Antarctica, they swim all the way to the northern parts of South America, possibly near Bolivia or Peru, right here. And that's their breeding season. I'd say that's where the Galapagos Islands are. And that's where they do their breeding season and migrating together. And once they've done, they finish what they've done. And once again, they feed themselves on krill as well to fill themselves up, to prep themselves for a very long journey all the way back to Antarctica. And you can see there's other migration treks that they go along to from one continent to another. So the Polynesians would have observed this and they said, all right, we can do it too. So that was a very brave and very courageous option that the Polynesians engineered. So really well done. You must be wondering, just to finish up this video, should I say, you must be wondering, did the Aborigines in Australia use celestial navigation? Did they have a vast astronomy knowledge? Well, here's a clue. I'll just show you right here. This is Orion's belt canoe, as they depict it. It's called Julpan. And as you can see, they're the three main stars. They don't see it as Orion, the hunter. They see it as canoe, right? So they see the bottom star, the brightest star, which is probably the red giant, and they just see the three stars in the middle. They don't see it as a belt. They see it as part of a shape of canoe, believe it or not. What's interesting about this map is that they used the sky with the land, and it's how they map their course across land to find food and water, but that's another topic for another video. This took thousands upon thousands of years, learning proficiently star mapping whilst the knowledge was handed down generations later. Nothing was perfect. It was trial and error, yes, Some have died while sailing through unknown treacherous seas, whilst encountering bad weather. Yes, some have gone off course and got stuck out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, not knowing which way to go next. These people only had their brains, their hands, and their bodies as the only navigation instruments to pinpoint land. And yes, they took a huge and calculated risk to venture out into the unknown, and because of that, it set their Pacific Ocean voyage on the world map today. If it wasn't for them, we'd still be back in the Dark Ages. Yes, it was dangerous. Yes, it was at their own peril. But that's what having a sense of adventure is all about. They got out of their comfort zone and left their safety net to explore the unknown. I mean, isn't that what exploring is all about? Sure, it brings uncertainty. Sure, you have no safety net to fall back on, but the rewards of the journey is sure well bloody worth it. You've got to give credit to them, the Polynesians. If it wasn't for them, these beautiful holiday island destinations we've taken for granted wouldn't exist as they are today. That's all for now.